Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Welcome to the Sport Business Podcast. I'm Martin Ross, Editor-in-Chief at Sport Business News. And this week, we have got a football special with Jonathan Rest, Chief Correspondent, and Joe Perry, Editor of Sport Business Media, having returned from the UCL final. Afternoon, guys.
Hello, Martin.
Hello. So, the newsroom this week, we're going to give you all the informed industry chat from Budapest, and we'll tackle UEFA national team and club media rights and audiences. We'll give you the AFC latest, and also what's top of the to-do list for some major European leagues. Then we'll be joined by Matt Williams, not the failed Scotland rugby coach from the 2000s, but senior reporter at Sport Business Sponsorship. He's going to break down the ECB's sponsorship strategy and latest deals as England's men's side returns to test match action against New Zealand, plus the usual look-aheads and any other business. So, to the returning duo, I'm going to bet that your experience was a bit more glamorous than mine. I was at Scotland Curaçao, where they had a mandatory cooling break at about, just as people were starting to put their jackets on, it was about 14 degrees. So we had a heating up break. Did you have a similar experience in Budapest? Give me a feel for the experience, the logistics, moving around the city, and how that compares to the regular Arsenal and PSG fans, to specify not the ones who were going full Grand Theft Auto in Paris, but the ones there.
Yeah, it was both our first experiences of a Champions League final. Let's hope it's not our last. It was, I mean, from what we saw of it, it was fantastic. It was a great city for it. Not the biggest stadium. I think 60,000 is pretty much the limit that UEFA will put a Champions League final. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the kind of branding around the city, the activation from the sponsor's point of view, and just the kind of number of people on the ground, a few people that we'd spoken to, mainly from the US that had come over, agencies, broadcasters, really do see this as, becoming like the Super Bowl, which I think is what, relevant football partners, when they, commercializing it in the next cycle, want it to be. The Super Bowl has become this thing where everyone turns up a week in advance and there's lots of parties and meetings and getting everyone on the ground. And it certainly felt that way to us. Obviously, we hadn't been at one before, but people that have been, ones for the last decade or so, I think Joe would agree, have certainly seemed to think that this is now a kind of must-attend event, whether you've got a ticket or not.
I would agree with John. I thought it was a really good weekend on the pitch, off the pitch. It was almost a bit like Sportel or Leaders, and you had the great and good of the industry all gathered in one place. But then you had a Champions League final to look forward to. I have to say, I'm glad we're recording this today and not Saturday night, because John did seem to lose his voice at some point, I think just after the penalty shootout. So it wouldn't be the best podcast episode then. But yeah, as John was saying, it's the event organization from our perspective works really well. But obviously we were working the event on a slightly different side of the ground to most of the match-going fans. I know, John, some of your friends in the Arsenal stands had a slightly worse experience, and not just because of the end result.
Yeah, I think it's just a wider issue with how football fans are treated still. I mean, a lot of my WhatsApp group was kind of blowing up with friends of mine that you go to a lot of away European games, and just the general experience they face, whether it was the kind of aggressive nature of the policing and the security. I mean, we didn't see any trouble in the city itself. I mean, I think the Arsenal fans probably outnumbered PSG fans by about 10-1, to be honest. But yeah, there was issues with kind of the ticketing, the access to it. We're talking about, this is kind of things that we are hearing from third parties, because Joe and I's experience was really quite fantastic, I have to say. I know, Martin, you went to a Europa League final a couple of years ago, didn't you? And there was issues just kind of, water for fans when it was like 40 degrees. I think there is a wider issue with how these UEFA finals and how fans are kind of the last resort, if you like. I'm not sure if you can cast your mind back a couple of years, Martin, to
4 years. Yeah.
Was it that long?
Yes, I know. I think about it every night. The defeat to Eintracht Frankfurt. Yeah, I think if UEFA is really wanting and relevant, really and rightly kind of pumping this up as a Super Bowl event, it has to match that in terms of the experience. The on-field experience is clearly brilliant, but there's a real discrepancy, I feel. I say I'm going from quite a small pool of a few finals. I was at the final in Dublin a couple of years ago, which was much better organised, I must say, than Seville for the regular fans. But if they want, there's still this, on occasion, appears to be this discrepancy between the access maybe issue and not, of course, hospitality and corporate is always going to be a different experience to the punters' experience. But I don't think they've quite nailed it yet. I mean, obviously, you go back to Paris and the Liverpool final and everything that came out of that as a study of that game and the lessons they learned. Doesn't sound like they've quite nailed it, although you're always going to get over-officious. I think different levels of officiousness of police in different countries. Spain was like that. I don't know if Hungary's known for having overzealous police, but sounds like it's not quite nailed just yet. But we'll see. Have you got over the defeat? It was a particularly sore one.
Yeah, well, I think winning the league kind of softens the blow quite easily. There was over 1 million people on the streets of North London on Sunday, which is about a third of the population of the winners, Doha. So congratulations to Doha.
Well, let's dive into some newsrooms items. First of all, the one, John, in between. Did you quaff any palinka? It is 40 to 50% proof fruit brandy. It's Hungarian. I don't know if you had any.
I did not. I don't think you can quaff something like that.
No, I don't think you can.
That's a shot, I think, is it?
But in between quaffing whatever you were quaffing on Friday, you broke a story about the new betting sponsor across all UEFA men's club competitions for the first time. Tell us a bit about that and what's left in the elevated tier and the non-elevated tier for the next cycle.
Yeah, so Bet365, which is the incumbent of the Champions, currently the sponsor of the Champions League. Betano has the Europa League and Conference League. Another year, as we know, to run on those deals. From 27-28, Bet365 has, we understand, done the contract for a 4-year deal across all 3 of the men's club competitions plus the Super Cup. I think relevant football partners themselves have put out a release in recent days to say that they're in exclusive negotiations with a sports betting partner. As I say, we understand that is Bet365. There was quite a lot of competition for that contract. They are going to be, say, across those competitions, but just as an official partner, I'm not quite sure the naming of that category. What they are not is one of the elevated tier. Now, I know we've had Ben Cronin on the pod before explaining the new model that UC3 are going with from 27-28. That is going to be 4 elevated partners. They are now closed, and that we also got announced last Friday. Alibaba, a deal that we had a couple of months ago exclusively, that now has been signed off. There was a photo shoot, I believe, in Budapest on Friday with Alexander Chefrin and Josai. So that one's done. We already know about Pepsi retaining that contract. We know AB InBev are coming in, taking Heineken's spot quite controversially. That's 3 of them. And we now understand that MasterCard is the 4th elevated tier, so that they're an incumbent as well in that payments category. So that's your 4 elevated. Below that, you will have 8. Those 4, I should say, sit across all the men's competitions. And then you're going to have 8 Champions League sponsors. So there'll be 12, for that. So, I mean, the speed with which relevant UC3 have finalised these deals is, really impressive. Speaking to people in the market in Budapest, I didn't speak to any sponsor, and I spoke to quite a few who had a bad word to say about what team had done. They were all super impressed with their professionalism, what they've done over the years, and equally as impressed with how relevant have kind of come in and slightly tweaked it, the different cycles. So those elevated partners are on 6-year deals now. Bet365 is 4. Traditionally, it's always been 3-year cycles. So kind of little tweaks like that, opening up some different categories. And I think the deals we understand have been done now, and there are still a lot more to go, get them above the 24-25 sponsorship revenue already, somewhere around 730 million euros, I believe, and well on track to exceed €1 billion for the 27-28, which would be the first of the new cycle. So, yeah, extraordinary numbers, really, and a lot more still to sell.
But nothing for Jingdong yet.
No, nothing for Jingdong yet. I think they've focused on the big 4. Bet365, as you say, we understand there's a licensing deals coming down the road. There's plenty more. I think the interesting thing with the Alibaba deal more than anything, which I spoke to a couple of people, and they said it raised a few eyebrows, or one guy told me his jaw hit the floor when he found out that Alibaba had AI, I mean, we're talking about how can you categorize AI as one thing? It's, multiple things now. And them having that has made a few incumbents, a few prospective sponsors go, oh, hang on a minute, what does that mean for what we want to do? So there might be some kind of tough conversations to have there. But yeah, this is a property that people will pay big money for.
Flipping it over to media, because I know Joe won't let us talk about sponsorship for too long. I presume you both saw the piracy numbers, which was The Guardian put these together with intel from Gaming Compliance International. The headline figure was 16.2 million illegal streams, which everybody sort of looked at and went, whoa. Slightly misleading in the sense that obviously lots of people would have been refreshing their screens with the ads coming up, or tech issues and reloading it, rebuffering, whatever. It was 3.7 million unique IP addresses, I think, is the figure to work from, which again is still a huge figure. Some people might have multiple devices, so again, you can't pin the number of people. Probably more people watching on their own illegally, but not necessarily, So we get an idea of just how much of a problem it remains, as everybody knows, but then also how that matches up with TNT's figures. I know you two are at the game, but for those watching from afar, a stark reminder of where the industry is, I suppose.
Those figures as well. I mean, these things must be incredibly difficult to measure. So who's to say whether that is the scale, whether it's more? It could well be. I think figures I've seen for TNT suggest that around 7 million people were watching legally, either on TNT or through HBO Max, which now has absorbed all of the TNT content that used to be on Discovery Plus in the UK. Either way, that is clearly a lot less than in previous years when ET Sport, as it was then, put the match on YouTube. I think the last final that Liverpool were in against Real Madrid had around 12.6 million peak. Clearly, they took this decision. It would have been a consideration for them, and they would have known that it would have encouraged some level of illegal streaming, but they would have calculated themselves that there was something in it for them, especially with HBO Max being a very new proposition. And they withstood some pressure. I mean, the Prime Minister, an Arsenal fan, he got involved. He implored TNT to make the match free. They stood their ground. And this was the end result. I know we were also looking at what the impact of kickoff time would be, and perhaps that came into it slightly as well. I know in France, for example, those figures down 20% on last year. Perhaps some of that is just winners' fatigue. Not that we necessarily know about that in our clubs, but I guess if you win one year, perhaps not so many tune in for the next season. That does seem to be borne across a couple of other markets. Germany down slightly, albeit the share was up, although you probably expect that, given it was moved from prime time to early evening. Figures in Spain were exactly flat. So I think if you were looking at the big 5 European markets in isolation, you might say that the kickoff time had a slightly negative impact. But of course, that was not a decision taken with those viewers in mind necessarily. It was a decision taken with the US in mind and with the global sponsor visibility as well.
France was, 9.2 million combined M6 and Canal Plus and ZDF 5.3 million, down about 14%. RTV 2.6 million in Spain. To me, that is really just bumping something from prime time to earlier in the evening. That would be the impact. But flip side is, you'll be able to watch it in Qatar, Saudi Arabia at 7 p.m, midnight in Beijing. So it's brought forward the game for a lot of Asian markets. So yeah, one to monitor, one final, so maybe not enough data on it, and probably not enough data on the TNT figure either, because we don't know average peak. It's not quite measured. Well, it's not quite maybe communicated in the same way that a public broadcaster would around, barb ratings and all the rest of it. So slightly tricky. They did say that the average audience for the 3 finals was up 5%, but then again, they all featured English teams this year. So slightly hard to work out.
I would just add on that, obviously, we don't know the full reasoning why they made the final earlier. There's a lot of talk. It's about getting families into the game. And obviously, we looked at it as more opening up the Asia market slightly. I mean, you could argue that, bringing it 3 hours earlier didn't do the US market any favors, but actually CBS put out their numbers and said that I think the final was an average of almost 3.1 million, peak of 3.9, and the average was up 51% on last year. Now, there's an argument that a total blowout, which, last year's final was, didn't help those numbers. But certainly despite kind of, the US game kicking off in the US, kind of in New York anyway, at I think, midday rather than 3 p.m. Not a massive difference, obviously, but didn't affect the numbers there. In fact, quite the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, to give UEFA their due, and we've talked about the fan experience. I mean, this is also with a view to fans at the game being able to get back from the game and people viewing and more younger viewers away. So, yeah, it's all a balance. Also on media rights, yeah, I suppose the big one we wrote about a couple of weeks ago was the UEFA national teams tender, which the deadline is Thursday, which is today, if you're listening today. Get your bids in. First time that these rights have been kind of put out to tender since CAA got the centralised contract well over sort of 12, 13 years ago. Joe, is there any sense of why this decision was taken?
Depending on who you spoke to, I think one of them is simply, like you say, it's been a long time since CAA got this contract 14 years ago now, and maybe the time was right to dip a toe back into the market, see what other people value these rights at. But I think there is also a sense from speaking to people around this that there is some more value out there, or at least there is a possibility of more value being out there in the US market, as we've seen recently with club competitions growing in the US. There is perhaps a sense that maybe some of that could be replicated, albeit these are slightly different properties. But also there is an idea that within Europe, some changes that are coming up with the qualifying structure could help unlock some value in third-party rights. So those are the rights when, I don't know, for example, to an English audience, Spain plays another team, and obviously in the current qualifying structure, that often means Spain play Moldova, and there isn't much interest in those rights. They end up on Amazon on a pay-per-view basis, and as we've talked about on this podcast before, they're kind of out of sight, out of mind. But I know within this new format, which you've been casting your eye over, Martin, there is a sense that perhaps if the bigger teams are playing each other, say it's Spain, Germany instead, then perhaps there will be more of an audience for those third-party rights here within Europe, which I think there is a sense that perhaps that might be reflected in increased valuations. Obviously, we'll see whether that holds out, but I can follow the logic, I think, looking at this new format.
Yeah, Spain versus rolled over in Chisinau is often a thrashing that people are tiring a bit of. Yeah, I'm not going to go full Giorgio Marchetti on you, but 20th of May was announced just around about the time we were writing about the tender. It was announced that the reformatting of the qualification campaign for the European qualifiers and also the Nations League was being rejigged. Just to do that, there would be 36 highest ranked teams in 3 groups of 12, which is a League A. They would play 6 games, home or away, and then they siphon off all the minnows, if you like, into 3 groups of 6 or 7 in a League B. So more games matter, more of a league format, a bit like the Champions League has been. Nations League also kind of goes into a similar format as well. And in their own words, from the UEFA president, they're going to reduce the number of dead matches. I'm pretty sure they didn't call them dead matches when they went to market with them, but looking back, they are apparently dead matches. Just to stick on football on this slightly elongated newsroom section to look back at some of the big things that have been happening and look forwards. AFC is, I suppose, the other big confederation one. We have a bit of an idea of a strong indication where it might go, but it's dependent on sign-off over the next period, isn't it?
What we have heard is that after what has been a very long process, actually, this has been going on for quite some time. I think it was Sportel 2024 when the AFC started talking to the market, and then it wasn't until the end of last year that an ITT went out, or an RFP, and then it wasn't until the end of January that bids came in, then it wasn't until April at the Congress in Vancouver that those bids started to be opened and inspected. We understand now that the incumbent Asian Football Group is the preferred bidder for the next cycle, but it has a period to conclude that deal, I think in particular around the minimum guarantee, to put that together, and subject to all that being agreed, then they will retain the rights. There is, I think, an official backup option in case that doesn't happen, but speaking to people over the last few days, it doesn't seem like that is a realistic possibility at the moment. I think those rights are staying put.
And that's potentially involving Sela.
Yeah, we have heard Sela was involved and wasn't involved at various stages in the process. I'm sure in good time on Sport Business Media, we'll be able to divulge a bit more. But from what we understand, Sela is involved, and that is part of the phase that's being agreed at the moment.
Okay, just a couple of other quick ones to wrap up on this, just to sort of whip around on European leagues. I mean, we could kick off with Serie A, which is it next week or this week? Joe, we're finally getting a bid deadline for private equity proposals. This is a process JP Morgan has been running with Serie A. Deloitte advised them before. JP Morgan informed them of the process before that, did some of the background. This is going on at the same time as that is sort of international media rights proposal gathering, shall we call it, not a full RFP, but that's moved forward.
Forward next week, I think, is when those bids will be opened and looked at, and in typical Serie A fashion, I'm sure we'll go to a meeting of clubs. There does seem to be one of those every couple of weeks. So set the dates for that. Those two processes, I think, have perhaps slightly delayed the other, in the sense that there is a separate process going on for private equity and a separate process going on for international rights. But of course, one of those informs the other one. So I think there has been a sense from speaking to some of the people involved and who've been putting together bids or considering putting together bids for this, that it's not quite clear actually what you're bidding for and who else is going to be at the table once it comes down to getting that contract. But I think all going to plan from Serie A's perspective, there will be some more clarity on that coming very soon.
John, League of Portugal?
Yeah, there was quite a bit of talk about that. Obviously we think we know, we've been writing about it for long enough that they're going to go into a centralisation process at the end of this decade. They are now preparing the market and have been welcoming a number of agencies to their headquarters for meetings around an advisory role. Again, keep an eye out on the news and sport business media going forward. We understand they are closing in on, or if not, have agreed a deal with an agency to act as an advisor. Again, we still don't know exactly how that centralisation process is going to look in terms of whether a commercial vehicle is being set up. There has been talk, hasn't there, Martin? You did a piece not long ago about, again, potential for private equity in that or not, or selling a stake or not. But yeah, we understand that, a major agency, and there were plenty of them, made their way to Portugal and had face-to-face meetings with the leagues. We understand that is close to being done now. The other one, I think, is quite interesting, and it's just a wider issue of how difficult the US market is at the moment for European football leagues. We've seen Serie A took a bit of a haircut there, to say the least, a few years ago. The Bundesliga deal is up now, I think, with ESPN, so they're kind of very actively in the market to make sure they have a new deal done in time for the new season, obviously working with Relevant with that big joint venture that they signed 18 months or so ago on the ground. La Liga's got a little bit longer still on their deal with ESPN, I think 2 more years. And just people you spoke to just say, unless you are an NFL or an NBA, it's a really tough market, the US at the moment, to get eyeballs with all the different platforms that are there, and also to get a number that you want. And I think the number that the leagues want is not the same as always as the broadcasters are willing to pay or the streamers are willing to pay. So yeah, worth kind of keeping an eye out over the next few months on some European leagues and their moves in America.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Joe. That'll be plenty of intel there on everything you garnered in Budapest and elsewhere. Quick nod as well, different sport, but ATP Tour story. Maria Koladova from Sport Business Media wrote a piece at the start of this week. Check the link in the notes on Sky, renewing, and not just DACH, which was announced on Sunday, but also UK and Italy. So she uncovered that exclusively on her trip to Paris. So check that one out. And we're going to be swapping footballs and tennis balls for cricket balls, white and red and pink. I don't know, they don't have pink balls anymore, do they? Not sure. But Matt Williams will be with us after the break to talk us through all things England cricket ECB commercial strategy.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back. We are joined now by Matthew Williams from Sport Business Sponsorship. Matthew, we have had some cracking weather of late. It's now raining, which means the English cricket season is well underway. The test match against New Zealand this week. I'm actually supposed to be off to a T20 game at the Oval tonight, and I'm expecting it to be washed out. But let's talk the commercial side of cricket. You published a piece in recent days on the England and Wales Cricket Board's kind of sponsorship portfolio, their new assets, their new approach. I think you called it a sponsorship reset. Talk a little bit about how the ECB sponsorship strategy has evolved in recent years and why?
Yeah. To tell this story, I think, first of all, we've got to go back to 2021. So obviously 5 years back, some people might think of it as the time sport sort of caught up with its calendar after the pandemic. We had the rescheduled Olympics, we had the rescheduled European Championship football. But for those working at the ECB and Two Circles at the time, they might think of it as the sort of moment in time for their strategy, particularly as it pertains to sponsorship. The sort of analysis at the time internally at the ECB was we're underperforming a little here in terms of sponsorship, particularly as it related to the England team. So, obviously there's different sort of silos within the ECB sponsorship structure. There's the domestic game, which was about to include the 100 for the first time. The 100 kicked off that summer in 21. And then, you've got the England team as well. And it was the national team where it really felt the growth of sponsorship was not performing as well as it could be. So they looked at what they could do, and they decided to enlist the help of Two Circles, entering a partnership with the agency where effectively Two Circles, sort of provides people to the ECB to sort of work full time as an extension of their team. So it sort of becomes an in-house plus operation, a bit sort of more concrete and closely linked than your traditional agency rights holder relationship. So that's what they did. And obviously 5 years is quite a significant and solid sample size to judge the progress at that. I've spoken to the ECB and Two Circles about it recently. They're really happy with what they've done. So if you took this time in 2020, at the time we're speaking now in 2021, just as we're starting the English cricket summer, there's actually a nice symmetry because they're about to play New Zealand in a test series, the men. And obviously the test series against New Zealand this year starts tomorrow. So at that point in 21, there was 8 sponsors that had rights that included the England cricket team. Now we have 12, or they have 12, sorry, giving away my fandom for the England team there. But staying neutral, they have 12. And also crucially within that, in terms of sort of value opportunity and revenue drivers, there were only 3 sponsors with on-kit branding at that time, and now you have 5. So obviously, on-kit visibility likely to drive more value, and that is the way it's gone as well. I think that, the ECB and Two Circles, they see it as a success, the project they've embarked on together. And the most notable change from sort of outside point of view would be if you looked at the England kit in 2021 to now, just the proliferation of and the prominence of brands on it, that tells a commercial story within itself.
It's not often that more is more as a premium sponsorship level. Usually we're told less is more. So that's interesting. Give us an idea of the results of this in terms of growth rate or sponsorship revenues, or even just some of the maybe 1 or 2 of the big values of the deals, and then maybe break down how much of it, as you say, is additional inventory and then also additional regulations that have been relaxed. Yeah.
So they're across the entire ECB sponsorship portfolio, not just England cricket, everything that it encompasses. So you got to factor in the 100 here and T20 Blast, other tournaments. They've reported a compound annual growth of around 11% across the sponsorship program over that 5-year period we talked about, and a roughly 50% increase in the number of sponsors. Now, obviously helped by the new inventory provided by the 100, which we might come on to a little bit later in terms of how that's shaping up in the present day. In terms of the England cricket platform that we should focus on because they decided to focus on it in their sort of revamped strategy, the major changes that we now see, whereas 2021 you had a front of shirt sponsor, a sleeve sponsor, and the kit supplier visible on the kit, you've now got an additional sleeve sponsor, and for the first time recently, a back of shirt sponsor. So the back of shirt sponsor's branding is interesting. The ICC actually opened this up to its nations, test playing nations, specifically for use in test cricket, because we've always had this kind of discrepancy between the prominence of brands in white ball cricket being much higher than test cricket, but we're seeing that change now and things being opened up for test cricket as well. So the ICC opened up the back of shirt for test cricket in late 2023, early 2024. The ECB immediately entered conversations about it. They ended up looking within their own ecosystem already. Vitality is the brand in question that it ultimately went with, and they already had the title rights to the T20 domestic competition, T20 Blast, and England International home T20s. They ultimately had that deal lined up for a while and ultimately announced it just before the Ashes that took place what started last year and finished in the early part of this year in Australia. They had it lined up, but they wanted to capitalize on the sort of prestige of the Ashes for the announcement. And, we understand that deal for the specific asset of the back of shirt. Obviously, Vitality have a wider relationship with the ECB, but it's low seven figures per year, that deal. So, a nice addition to the sponsorship portfolio that just wasn't there before. Some of their other deals, both sleeve sponsors, slightly higher than in terms of value than Vitality, still in the sort of low seven-figure mark, but both sort of slightly higher in that £2 to £3 million per year range. And you can get more detail and more explanation of the nuance to each deal on the Sport Business sponsorship platform in the feature piece you mentioned. So yeah, I think ultimately the story is new assets, and what's interesting as well is how the different countries have approached the sort of increasing availability of on-kit spaces in international cricket.
Yeah, I was going to ask that, Matthew. What, when we talk about Test cricket in particular, it's only really, from a commercial point of view, it's three major nations bodies, isn't it? It's England, Australia, and India. How does the ECB compare to what Cricket Australia and the BCCI have been able to do? I mean, I can imagine BCCI must have brands knocking down the door to get on that India kit.
Really interesting, actually, in terms. So we talked about ECB taking this step from a point where, if you take about further than 2021, pre-2020, pre-pandemic, Test cricket, you didn't see front of shirt sponsors at all. Wasn't allowed by the ICC. The financial challenges of the pandemic prompted a change in thinking there. Test cricket's always had this sort of traditional association, and I don't think many people would have imagined in 2019 how many brands would be on the ECB kit now. Now, not every sort of powerful cricketing nation has taken that route, which is the sort of interesting point. Like Martin said, ECB have gone for more is more. The BCCI have actually stuck to less is more. They've just got front of shirt sponsor Apollo Tyres. We talked about that deal on this podcast before when the previous deal with Dream 11 ended. They've got Apollo Tyres and kit supplier Adidas. But, as Sport Business sponsorship, we understand that nets them around $30 million per year, those two deals. So they're on kit asset. For comparison, the ECB, we estimate or understand that those 5 on kit positions I've talked about are earning around $20 million per year just to keep the currency the same there. Obviously, the deals will be done in pounds. And then Cricket Australia, which is the third of that big three, slightly lower. We estimate around $15 million. It's a bit more nuanced. Can't quite put it as on the nose in terms of numbers because they have deals that are sort of packaged with wider assets, different competitions that also include shirt branding. But it's certainly, as we analyze it, in third place among the three. But I think it is interesting that out of all the teams, and we see sort of the prominence of brands on kits in, for example, the IPL, the Indian T20 league that leads franchise cricket globally. But then we actually see a contrast at international level where BCCI have gone for quite a quiet branding strategy on their kit. I mean, you've got, the Adidas 3 stripes and you can't really miss them. But it's actually the ECB who might typically be looked at as a bit more traditional when it comes to sort of how they approach cricket and the ecosystem commercially, certainly when you look at the domestic game. But on an international kit point of view, they're pulling their shirt much more than the BCCI. And like you say, it's not because the BCCI haven't got suitors for those positions. It's a conscious decision.
Matt, can I pick you up very quickly on inquire about a Cricket Australia point? Is pitvertising still a thing? I mean, listeners who don't know what that is, it was Cricket Australia landed a sponsorship deal with Rexona so that the umpires could have branding under their arm when they gave people out in the decision. Obviously, their hand was in the air. Is that, I know that that's a bit gimmicky and it's not central to any cricket board sponsorship strategy, but was that a flash in the pan?
That's something that I would have to be honest, double check on myself.
I know it was. I'm just curious. It's one of these things you hear about and then kind of goes away.
Well, it's funny because Rexona also got involved with the 100 to sort of bring it back to the ECB with a similar type of idea where you'd see it on the umpires' uniforms, kits, however you describe the sort of umpires' attire. Yeah, so hypnotizing probably hasn't taken off and endured, but the 100 is something that I think we should reference in relation to the ECB. They might feel they've sorted out their England team sponsorship portfolio now and put that in a good place in terms of growth, but it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve in terms of that overall number I mentioned of 11%. as I say, that's not just inland cricket, that includes the 100. Be interesting to see how that's impacted, because obviously, as we've talked about on Sport Business, on this podcast and on our wider platforms, there's been a big sort of structural change with the 100 ownership-wise. And John, I know that's something, you've written a lot about. I'm interested to see now how things evolve in terms of sponsorship there, because previously the ECB controlled all assets for the competition centrally. Now, in this sort of immediate future or present, the new 100 owners have been afforded or been granted the front of shirt and kit supply assets for their teams. Now, I don't know about you, John, you're across sort of how much money all those investors have put into the tournament. If I was them, I'd also be looking to have the ability to sell some of the other big assets like sleeve sponsorship, back of shirt, and assume, which the ECB are still controlling centrally. But I'm intrigued to see how that might affect ECB sponsorship revenues as the sort of owners become more prominent at an individual level and build their own individual franchise commercial platforms rather than deals being sold centrally.
Yeah, I think, as you say, you look at the makeup of the ownerships of the 100 teams and what else they own. It doesn't take a genius to work out that they're going to look to kind of sign central deals throughout their franchises around the world. And what part of the pie does that take out for the ECB when they're going to market?
It's worth saying, I put the question to them about this recently, and they said they're not forecasting any hit in sponsorship revenues. You would expect them to say that. And at the moment, they're retaining, as I say, the sleeve assets. They've got Toyota and KP Snacks, both also sponsors of the England national team. They've got them signed up to those roles for this year coming. Those are lucrative positions. But as I say, I'd be surprised if the owners of the franchises don't look to getting control of those positions as well. And then the ECB, how are they going to address that shortfall if that does happen?
Yeah. No, thank you, Matt. And that also seems to have created a bit of a lag. Certainly, if you look at the kit announcement at the start of this week, I think only 4 on the front of shirts of all the teams. So one to watch. Thank you for the detailed explanation of where England cricket is placed, how their sponsorship revenues have developed, and how the inventory has been sold. We will get you back on soon, I'm sure. We will also be back imminently with more industry chat to look ahead to what's coming up and any other business. Stay with us.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry, delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
Back for the third and final part of this week's podcast. Martin, what is your look ahead to the week of sport coming up?
Well, top of the shop, I want you to hit me with your Kyrgyzstan fact.
Yes, well, we've covered a media rights deal in Kyrgyzstan for the World Cup. Now, of course, unfortunately, Kyrgyzstan did not qualify, but neighbouring Uzbekistan did. And I did a bit of research and found that the Uzbek population in Kyrgyzstan is around nearly 900,000, represents 15% of the population. So we shouldn't have dismissed that rights deal in Kyrgyzstan so quickly in our morning news meeting.
Very true, very true. And it also gives me a chance to mention that on Monday night, I triumphed in the World Cup pub quiz, which was led by Rory Hamilton of TNT Sports commentary fame. He was the question master. We had a team of 3 and we triumphed of 22 teams. And Uzbekistan was the name given to us. So we triumphed and took the trophy all the way back to Tashkent.
Another Uzbek bit of fact for you here, Martin. I have to credit the BBC for this because I hadn't seen this story. Apparently, FIFA has put out obviously, we know the fixtures, and now they put out which team are going to wear which kit they are permitted to wear. And Uzbekistan and Ghana will not be wearing their home kit in any of the group stage games. So
Wow.
if you've bought your Uzbekistan home kit, which if it's like all other kits is about £120, 108 different kits are going to be on display. That doesn't include goalkeeper kits. So you've got all 48 teams, and then a few of them have got a third kit. And there's some teams that aren't going to be wearing their away shirts, likes of Netherlands and Australia, unless they get through, of course. Scotland, did you know, are going to have a different goalkeeper kit for all 3 group games. So
I didn't know that. I knew that they're
around.
opening up in their away kit, which is the first time they've worn an away kit at the World Cup since kind of garish yellow number they wore against Norway in Bordeaux. But because Haiti play in blue, Haiti demolished New Zealand 4-0 last night, which concerns me a bit. Anyway, No, and but there's some absolute bangers. I bought my nephew the Argentina away kit, which he loves. I said, "Are you sure you want this?" Growing up in the middle of England, he said, "Absolutely." I was like, "Good boy." So he's walking around in that. It's quite a popular one. The Curacao top is lovely. I saw there's a strong Curacao away support, believe it or not, at Hampden on Saturday.
It's a load of Dutch people, I guess.
Well, maybe, but yeah, they've got a cracking shirt. So good intel. I like that. I will be looking forward to checking out all the various kits at the World Cup. More from a media rights point of view, this weekend, I'll have a look at the Monaco Grand Prix. Have a look at, that makes me sound about 90 on the wireless. But it marks the return of free-to-air coverage in Germany, which typically has been on RTL. Sky and RTL have signed a series of sub-licensing deals over the years, with the exception, I think, of 2023, when Sky came up with a kind of YouTube solution, I think. This one's been a bit more complicated for a couple of reasons. Obviously, the Sky RTL takeover merger's been going through, so they've had to be a bit kind of hands-off as that's been going through. It's been cleared by the European Commission. It's finalised, it's announced, so RTL will be showing free-to-air action for the rest of the season, possibly up to 7 Grand Prix. They showed 7 last season, so we will see. There was also a challenge from Austria, ORF and Service, who complained that the RTL overspill, and it's always the German channels that seem to overspill, as ADF had an overspill issue for many years. The overspill into Austria would have affected their audience and advertising returns, they argued. So who knows if that was a major issue or not, or just a complaint over the border. But yes, we will be back with RTL this weekend, and also discovered this week that the price, and this was announced by RTL, so it was announced that they're only making an upfront cash payment of 68 million euros to close the takeover. That's down on the 150 million figure communicated a year ago. Now, that has been put down to, according to RTL, customary net working capital and debt-like item adjustments. So, yes, that figure is lower. There is an earnout of up to 377 million euros for Comcast, but only if the RTL share price hits certain numbers. So that's probably pretty unlikely that they get to that figure. So what was a deal that kind of reinforced how everybody felt, I suppose, about big media at the time is even less than we thought in terms of the payment that's been made. John, I am going to ask you for your whimsical, no pressure, but whimsical any other business.
Yeah, well, it is Stanley Cup time in North America. We've had game 1, so the Las Vegas Golden Knights are beating the Carolina Hurricanes by 1-0. A little word of mention for the Golden Knights, owned by Bill Foley of the Black Knight Football Group, or Black Knight. What an unbelievable season he's having on the sport front. Getting Bournemouth, obviously, in Europe for the first time. Auckland FC won the A-League, and now his Golden Knights are in charge. But I don't.
You said that last year, didn't you? Though I think
did.
That's
yeah,
to show how well they're doing.
Yeah. Well, they had got to the final, I think, or they won the main standing of the A-League before it went into the kind of playoff finals last year. And the Golden Knights have been great, and Bournemouth have been great, and yeah, so fair play to him. But I don't want to talk about the Stanley Cup, Martin.
Well, I do for a moment, because I was going to say they're massive favourites to win the Stanley Cup, because they're playing the Hurricanes, who are famously a cartoon team.
I knew you were going to go here.
Who play in a huge, impressive stadium in the middle of the Amazon? I'm not sure.
It was with a Scottish manager who must have struggled with that
angry,
sweaty,
possibly
sweaty
slightly
heat.
drunk Scottish manager.
Yeah, there we go.
Surely another victory for the Knights against the Hurricanes, but who knows?
Yeah, well,
no, you want to mention a different kind of...
I do, yeah, because I don't know how big a fan you are of ice hockey, but I know you're a big fan of doggies. And it's Stanley Pup time.
Nice.
Now, this is the 3rd iteration of the Stanley Pup. I had never heard of it, I have to say, until today. But yeah, it's basically all 32 NHL teams have kind of like a dog assigned to them, and these are rescue dogs, I think, and they're going to be put through their paces not on the ice. I think like a floor that looks like ice, and it's televised. It's on True TV and HBO in the US. It's on Sportsnet in Canada. It's going to air on June the 8th. So if you're in those markets, let us know what it's like. Yeah, it's going to feature some celebrity dog lovers, some comedians, some players, and yeah, a dog will be assigned to each team. So you've got the Winnipeg Jets, I guess, would be the favourites.
Oh, nice. I suppose not Arizona Coyotes are no more, so nothing for them. But I would put my money on the Florida Panthers.
Oh, nice. Yeah, well, there we are. As always with with these, please do write in with your NHL dogs. And yeah, so looking forward to finding out which dog wins
Yeah,
that.
that's genuinely brilliant, actually. Just on the back, we've just had Good Woof,
Yes.
which is a sister event to a Goodwood. And then also there was a Spanish or Italian team, I think, recently that walked out with different rescue dogs that were looking for new homes. So all up for this, all up for Crufts. Yeah, more of that, the better.
There we are. Well, that is as good a place as any to leave it, I reckon, Martin, before we
Sounds
all
good.
head off and look forward to a World Cup coming up. Maybe we'll talk about that on next week's pod. But as always, for the most accurate rights fees across media and sponsorship and all the latest breaking news from the global sports business industry, head to sportbusiness.com and we'll be back with another episode next week.